Welcome everyone to this course on cybersecurity and IT risk management in the enterprise. About myself, I have 10 years of combined experience in IT risk management and cybersecurity spanning banking, insurance, and technology companies. I am a certified information systems auditor and a certified information systems security professional. Now, this course is aimed at those people starting their careers in cybersecurity, IT risk or IT audit, or those people preparing for interviews in the field. Now, this course provides you a bird's eye view of the functions within cybersecurity and IT risk management, and it presents concise concepts that you can easily pick up and apply at your workplaces. Now, without further ado, let's get started. The teams fall into three main buckets. The first bucket is the IT security team. The IT security team is responsible for manning and operationalizing the different security tools within the company. Security tools such as firewalls, web proxies, intrusion detection and prevention systems, anti-malware, data loss prevention, vulnerability management solutions, etc. The second bucket is the IT risk management team. Now, this team is responsible for carrying out risk assessments within the organization, especially assessing the services, the applications, the infrastructure. From a risk perspective, any risk identified will have to be raised to management, properly documented, and registered in a risk register. Now, the IT risk management team is also responsible in ensuring that there are risk action items that are agreed with management to bring every identified risk within tolerance levels. They are responsible for following through the risk action items to completion. The IT audit team is the third bucket. Now, the IT audit team is responsible for making sure that the company's policies, standards, and regulatory framework are complied with. So they basically carry out audit assessments on the different services, applications, and infrastructure within the company and make sure that the compliance levels are up to the mark. The reporting structure for these three teams are slightly different organization to organization. The IT security team typically reports to the IT department, whereas the IT risk management team usually has a choice. They either report to IT or the chief risk office. And the IT audit team, they are independent in their reporting lines. They usually report to the board of directors. Now, these three teams are also known as the three lines of defenses, with the IT security team forming the first line, the IT risk management forming the second line, and IT audit the third line. The idea here is that if any controls fail in the first line of defense, then the second line of defense takes notice of it and remediates it. And if any control fails in the second line, then the third line comes into action. So this is a way of prudently managing controls and risks within an organization. The IT security team has many subdivisions. The first subdivision is the identity and access management team. This team ensures that the access lifecycle within the organization is properly implemented. Access raising, access review and approval, access provisioning, and access revocation is properly done. The next team is the data loss prevention team. Now, this team is responsible for identifying sensitive data within the organization and in making sure that those sensitive data are protected at every point of their traversal within the organization. The third team is the security incident and event management team, also known as the CM team. They are responsible for ensuring that any security relevant logs are properly piped into a central logging infrastructure and are properly maintained and recorded. The next team is a security operations center. This team actually looks at the different metrics and alerts from the different systems within the organization and looks for signs of compromise or attack. And if they find any signs of an attack, they will triage it, make sure that it's a true positive, and hand it over to the next team. The next team is a security incident response team, also known as a CERT team. And this team is a specialized team capable of containing confirmed incidents within the organization and carrying out all the remediation actions to recover the systems being compromised. The next team is a security awareness and training team. And as the name suggests, this team is responsible for carrying out awareness activities, awareness training within the organization and ensuring that employees are properly educated to not fall victim to common attacks such as phishing and social engineering. Let's take a look at the main cybersecurity concepts that you should be aware of. Attack surfaces. Attack surfaces are all the entry points that can be used by an attacker to gain access to the organization. Now, depending upon whether the attacker is an outsider or an insider, there are different attack surfaces. The common attack surfaces that we find in today's enterprise are desktop devices, laptops, tablets, mobile phones connected to the company's network, server infrastructure, networking devices such as routers and switches, and internet-connected IoT devices such as printers, IP phones, video and audio conferencing devices. All of these devices should be properly secured for the organization to be secured. Network Access Control, or NAC. Now, as the name suggests, this is a control that companies use to control which devices gain access to their internal network and to what extent. Imagine that a sanctioned device which is approved by the company and has the adequate controls that the company requires try to connect to the company's Wi-Fi or LAN network. Now the NAC policy kicks in and recognizes the device as an approved device and provides it access to the internet and the company's internal data center networks. Now imagine that a non-sanctioned device, which is a personal device, tries to connect to the company's Wi-Fi or LAN network. Now what happens here is that depending upon the NAC policy, the machine will fail to get an IP address, or the machine will get an IP address but only get secluded access to the internet and no access to the company's internal network. Network segmentation and firewalling. Firewall. A firewall is a network device that inspects network traffic and either allows or denies the traffic based on certain preset criteria or rules. Network segmentation. Imagine that a company has a big network and an attacker tries to gain access to this network and is successful in doing so. Now that is end of the story, because the attacker would pretty much be able to see all the other servers and machines within the network and tries to attack them as well. Now how do we make the attacker's job a bit difficult? We do this by segmenting the network and placing firewall devices between these networks and only allowing traffic that has a business justification to flow through and between the segments. Now, the three main top level segments that exist in today's organizations are the corporate network, the server network, and the demilitarized zone. Now, employees connect their devices, their laptops and desktops to the corporate network, whereas servers exist in the server network, and any device that needs to accept connections from the internet, such as email devices, email servers, web servers, and DNS servers exist in the DMZ. Now, these top level segments could further be granularly divided based on different grouping factors such as legal entities that exist within the organization, business divisions, departments, different applications, and the application environment such as development, user acceptance testing, production, or the application component tiers itself, front end, back end, databases, etc. Intrusion prevention systems, or IPS. Let's first take a look at the difference between firewall and IPS. Firewall is a network control device that looks at the source and destination IP addresses and the source and destination port numbers, and based on preset rules within the firewall, either allow or deny the traffic. Now, IPSs work a bit different. IPSs are basically network devices that look at the oncoming packet traffic and look for signs of attack, and if there is a match of the sign with its own internal database of signatures of attack, it will drop those traffic. Now, the common type of attacks that are dropped by the IPS are malformed packets that are aimed at crashing the system which receives those packets, and snooping packets that are aimed at fingerprinting the devices and the services in the internal network of the organization. Honeypots. Honeypots are an important tool in the security arsenal of an organization and should be strategically deployed to different critical network segments within the organization. What a honeypot does is that it looks for incoming traffic from other devices in the same network when it is least expecting such traffic. So it takes a note of who is sending them this traffic, in what quantity and what frequency. Then it informs the IT security team about this traffic. Now, there are only a few situations in which a honeypot can receive a traffic, and some of them are very dangerous situations. The first scenario is when somebody mistyped the IP address or host name that they were trying to reach and reached the honeypot instead. This is a safe situation. The second situation is approved vulnerability scanning that's taking place within the organization. Again, a safe situation. The third situation is when a curious insider is scanning the network, trying to find out what are the other devices that's present in the network and what services they are running. Now, this curious insider can turn into a potential attacker. The fourth situation is when a machine has been compromised and an attacker is using the compromised machine to scan the network, trying to find out what devices exist in the network and what services they are running. So honeypots are a very important tool in that they can provide early warning signs before an impending attack within an organization. And these honeypots should never be ignored in the security setup of an organization. Platform hardening. What is platform hardening? Imagine that you have a very valuable asset in your house and you know that all the thieves of the world are after your asset. What will you do in this situation? You will try to improve the security of your house. You will make sure that the gates are properly locked and bolted. You will let out the guard dogs. You will make sure that infrared cameras and motion detectors are deployed in your house, basically trying to notch up the security. The same concept applies in the world of IT security and risk, where you want to protect the company's critical assets and critical data. You ensure that every platform is properly secured. So for every platform, the configurations should be reviewed and a set of configurations that is secure and practical should be arrived at and published. This is called as the baseline. Every device that is provisioned in the organization should be deployed with the baseline configuration. And a process should be put in place to periodically assess any deviations of the device's configuration with that of the baseline, and steps should be taken to remediate any deviation. Now let's take examples of platform hardening for certain scenarios. For endpoint devices for employees, hardening should be done in such a way that administrator accounts are not given out to employees. They should be only given with non-admin accounts. Employees should not be allowed to install any software as they wish. They should only be able to allowed to install software that is approved for installation in the company. And USB write access should be blocked or protected such that sensitive confidential data does not leak out through the USB channel. Hardening for operating systems. Logging should be enabled and configured in such a way that logs are sent to the central log server. And all the endpoints and servers in the company should join domain and ensure that the configurations are managed through group policies so that all the policies are managed from a central management server. Hardening for off-the-shelf applications and platforms. Make sure that default accounts are removed. If they are not removed, any attacker with knowledge of default accounts can try to use those accounts to get access to your platform. Antivirus programs. Now these are programs that protects the operating system from the execution of malicious programs. There are three main approaches used by antivirus programs to protect the operating system. The first one is signature-based protection. Now it is possible to create a hash for any content or any file present in an operating system using a hashing function. And slight changes in the contents of the file will create a different hash. Now, these hashes could be used as signatures, and antivirus software has an internal database of signatures of known malicious programs. And if it finds that any of the files present in the operating system or the file loaded into memory for execution has a hash that matches with that of a malicious program, then it prevents the execution of that particular program and quarantines it. The second approach used by antivirus programs is behavior-based protection. Now, if it finds that any of the running programs is displaying malicious behavior, then it prevents further execution of that program. Examples of malicious behavior are trying to delete files in bulk, communicating to non-malware domains, and accessing system files and registry in a suspicious manner. The third approach used is called sandboxing. Now, this is for files that are not known to be safe or malicious. For such programs, the antivirus sends them to a sandbox environment and the program is allowed to let loose. Now, if the program turns out to be a malicious program, no real harm is done because it is a sandbox environment and the program gets tagged as malicious. Email protection. Now, as per a 2019 study report done by Verizon, 90% of cyber attacks take place through the email channel, 10% through web channel, and only close to 0% through other channels. So it is very essential that organizations protect their email and web channels from attacks. The main way in which attacks come in through the email channel is through phishing emails. Now, these are emails which pose as legitimate communication coming from somebody you trust or some organization you trust, but then they have links to malicious websites where if you submit your sensitive information such as credentials and personal information, it will be used against you, or it will tempt you to download a file which is usually a malware. Organizations should use solutions such as secure email gateways, which will scan incoming emails for malicious attachments or signs of other phishing and block such emails before they reach the users. Web protection through secure web gateways. Now, we already saw that 10% of cyber attacks that take place in the organization is through the web channel. So this channel should be properly secured. There are three main types of protection provided by secure web gateways. The first one is reputation-based protection. So every website out in the internet is given a reputation score based on how the website has performed in the past and whether there were any cases of malware linked to the website. Now, when somebody within the organization makes a request to access the website's reputation is checked, and if it is a bad reputed site, then that access request is blocked. The second control is through URL and content filtering based on categories. All the websites in the internet will be categorized into different buckets, and all those categories which the management of the organization deem unfit for the organization can be blocked away. The third control is scanning for malware in all the files that are being downloaded from the internet. So any malware ridden files will be blocked at the network layer itself before it reaches the user's computer. Data loss prevention solution. Every company has confidential data that it wants to closely safeguard. Examples of confidential data would be customer personally identifiable information such as name, physical address, email address, government ID, passport number, driving license, etc. Company proprietary source codes and intellectual property owned by the company, and unannounced company plans such as expansion plans, mergers and acquisitions, etc. Data loss prevention solutions helps to ensure that the above confidential data does not leak out of the company. Now, the most common points at which DLP solutions are applied are email channels, web traffic, print jobs, and data transfer to USB devices. Data loss prevention solutions search for confidential data to be protected by using two main approaches. The first approach is a regular expression-based approach. Regular expressions will be used to search for patterns of data at all egress points within the organization. And if there is a pattern match found, then that particular content will be prevented from escaping the organization. The second approach used is a hashing-based approach. Hashes will be made of sensitive files within the organization, and hash comparisons will be done at every egress point within the organization. And if there is a hash match, then that particular file will be prevented from leaving the organization. Vulnerability scanning. Vulnerability scanners are devices that scan the entire IT estate of the organization. So any device with an IP address will be scanned, and the scanner will check what are the services running in those devices. So some of the common ports that will be checked are SSH, FTP, HTTP, HTTPS, etc. Vulnerability scanners are able to fingerprint the operating system running in the device to a certain degree of certainty. As in this example, you can see that the device is running a Linux kernel version 2.6.39. Vulnerability scanners are also able to fingerprint the services that are running on the devices. And as in the example given on the screen, the vulnerability scanner was successfully able to look at port 22 and the software that is running in the port, which is OpenSSH 5.3 P1 for one device and 4.7 P1 for another device. After getting the details of the operating system as well as the services that the device is running, the vulnerability scanner can compare these version numbers with its own internal database of versions of different operating systems and programs, and can determine what vulnerabilities are affecting the particular device in question. Vulnerability scanners are also able to perform authenticated scans on devices, provided that they are provided with the right credentials. Now, authenticated scans provide near to 100% authenticity on the scan results produced by the vulnerability scanners. Patch management or patching is a process whereby security updates to the different platforms and applications within the organization are applied on a timely manner. The patch management process is a sister process to the vulnerability management process. The difference between the two is that vulnerability management tries to discover vulnerabilities after they have existed in the system, whereas patch management tries to take a more proactive approach. As soon as a vendor releases a patch, the patch management process collects the patch and applies it on all affected devices. Patch frequency or period should be established for every application and platform within the organization. Now, the frequency could be vastly different depending upon what platform or application it is. For Windows platforms, patches come out every 4 weeks on a Tuesday known as the Patch Tuesday. For Firefox browser, patches are released every 4 weeks as well, whereas for Chrome browser, it is every 6 weeks. When critical security patches are released by vendors, the organization should apply them as soon as possible and not wait for the patch cycle to hit. This is because these patches are remediating some critical vulnerabilities within the platform. Internet of Things devices and their security. Examples of IoT devices are IP phones, printers, audio and video conferencing devices. Most organizations pay very less attention to IoT devices and their security, but these are some of the most vulnerable devices within the organizations. This is because they are very less sophisticated devices and they don't have the typical computing power that a laptop or a desktop can possess. So they cannot install protection solutions such as antivirus solutions. So what we could do is to include the IoT devices into the organization's vulnerability scanning and patch management program. This way, as soon as a patch comes out or a vulnerability is discovered for these IoT devices, they are remediated in a timely manner. And what we could further do is to segregate the IoT devices into separate networks and properly firewall them so that only approved source devices are allowed to communicate to the IoT devices, and the IoT devices themselves can only reach out to approved destinations. Password managers for individual password management. Passwords are everywhere. We use passwords to log into our work laptop and the different applications that we have access to at work, and even our social networking websites and personal email accounts. Now, people tend to use the same password or similar password to the different accounts that they have access to. Now, this is because of the difficulty in remembering the different passwords. Now, password breaches have also become commonplace. We know that big players like Yahoo, LinkedIn, eBay, Adobe have been breached in the past. When malicious actors get hold of these leaked passwords, what they do is that they try the same passwords or a combination of those passwords in other accounts with the hope that we have reused our passwords. Now, if we have really reused our passwords, then we are in serious trouble because we will be hacked. Now, this is where password managers can really help us. Password managers can help to generate strong passwords for different sites and store those passwords. And they have the ability to autofill the password based on which platform we are visiting. We just need one strong master password to access the password manager. And the access can further be strengthened using multi-factor authentication, such as biometric passwords, such as the fingerprint or a physical token device, or even a one-time password that is sent to our mobile device through SMS. Now, the most popular password managers out there are CyberArk Vault, LastPass, and 1Password. Secrets management solution. In the previous session, we saw how individuals should properly manage access to secrets that they need to use. In this session, we will actually see how applications running in the context of the organization should manage their access to secrets. Applications need to access different secrets such as passwords, API tokens, connection strings, SSH secret keys, etc. Now, the usual practice is for developers to hard-code these secrets in the source code of the application itself, which is version controlled in solutions such as GitLab, GitHub, Bitbucket, etc. Now, this is a really bad idea because different people have access to the source code, and so they have access to the secrets as well. And when those individuals leave, the secrets leave with them. And this is why key vaults are important. Key vaults help to ensure that the secrets are securely vaulted away from the source code. And whenever an application needs to access the secret, it makes a call to the key vault, which provides it with the secret, and the secret is loaded into memory. After its use, it is destroyed. Now, the popular key vaults are CyberArk, HashiCorp Vault, AWS Key Management Service, and Azure Key Vault. Using a key vault is the most preferred option. Now, imagine that your organization does not have a key vault. Then what do? Then there are three approaches here. The first approach is to keep the secrets in a file that is encrypted and the file is kept out of version control. The second approach is to keep the secret in an environment variable and the application reads the environment variable. The third approach is to keep the secret in a configuration file, which is kept away from version control. Now let's look at the main IT risk management concepts. Policies and standards. Policies and standards are documented mandates that needs to be approved and supported by top level management within the organization. Now only through strong top management support can IT risk, IT security and IT audit teams do a good job in terms of building a secure and risk aware organization. Policies set high-level direction, intention, and purpose, whereas standards mention detailed instructions on how the high-level direction could be achieved. Now let's see an example. The policy statement could say all applications should implement strong passwords, whereas the standard statement would be password should be a combination of uppercase, lowercase, numbers, special characters with at least 15 characters in length. Now, it is very important that all the employees of the organization are given adequate training on policies and standards set by the top level management through security awareness training and other means. Let us look at the most common policies that organizations have. Acceptable usage policy. It basically defines what is acceptable behavior in the context of working for the organization. The company's resources should only be used for legitimate business purposes. Every individual is responsible for the user credentials, the user password that is assigned to him or her, and it should not be shared with another individual. Employees should not disclose any confidential or internal information to anybody without authorization, etc. Information security policy. The information security policy basically defines the measures that the organization should take to protect data and the applications hosting the data within the organization. Change management policy. In an organization with hundreds of applications and thousands of modules within those applications, changes to each and every module should be properly managed. A change that is introduced to one component has the potential to affect all the other components. As an example, a deny rule in a firewall has the potential to bring down the network traffic to and from the company and thereby disrupting business. So all changes made within the organization should be properly planned, backout procedures should be defined, properly tested and approved before the actual change is made. Disaster recovery policy sets the direction that an organization should take when planning their applications and infrastructure, such that a disaster that happens to the main production center does not completely bring down the business. The business can resume operations once they fail over to the recovery site. Clear desk policy basically sets the directive that confidential and internal documents should not be left unattended in employee desks, and at the end of every day, employees should make sure that any such documents are properly secured before they head home. Email policy. Email policy defines that the company's email application and infrastructure should only be used for legitimate business purposes. Confidential data should only be sent through the email channel to a recipient if there is proper business justification for that. And measures to secure such confidential data should be taken, such as through encryption using a password. Access management policy. This policy governs all the accesses within the organization, regardless of whether it is to applications, infrastructure, or physical premises. All access provisioning requests and change requests should be taken through a proper approval chain and should be properly recorded. All changes in access should be auditable. All access provisioned within the organization should be reviewed on a periodic basis, say every 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, etc. And the organization should have a mover and leaver process whereby if an individual moves between departments or leaves the organization, their accesses are properly revoked. Security awareness policy. All employees should be given adequate and periodic security awareness training such that they are always on the guard against phishing emails and phishing calls, and they know how to properly deal with strangers who ask for help in quotes, who wants to gain access to the office premise or is soliciting some confidential or internal data of the organization. Web application security policy. This policy defines the security checks that the organization should take against every web application in the organization. These tests mainly come from the OWASP project, and examples of tests would be testing for cross-site scripting, broken authentication, SQL injection, etc. Penetration testing policy. This policy basically sets the directive that all critical applications which are accessible over the internet should undergo penetration testing. Any vulnerability existing within the application should be identified and remediated before the application is made available for public usage. Bring Your Own Device or BYOD policy. This policy basically defines the do's and don'ts when employees bring their personal devices to work. A sample requirement that could be included in the policy is that employees should install company provided security software on their personal device before they are allowed to access company resources from the personal device. Log management policy. This policy sets a directive on how logs generated from applications and infrastructure should be stored. This policy often requires that logs be forwarded to a central logging server, and logs should be protected from tampering and unauthorized modifications. The CIA triad: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Confidentiality is the control that ensures that data and systems within the organization can only be accessed by those who have a proper business justification and proper business authorization to do so. Integrity is the control that ensures that data and systems within the organization are protected from all unauthorized modifications. Availability is the control that ensures that data and systems supporting it are ensured to be available as expected and designed by the organization. The CIA triad is used as a model for IT risk management within organizations. So if there is any scenario that can potentially affect the confidentiality, integrity, or availability of data and systems within organizations, then that scenario should be raised as a risk and should be properly managed. Let's take a look at a few scenarios and the risk they present. A company has an internal employee organizational structure application which is meant for internal use. However, it so happened that the administrator for the web app has misconfigured the application, and people who are outside of the organization are also able to reach out to the web app and search for employee names. Now, in this scenario, the company is facing a loss of confidentiality because people outside of the organization who should not be having access to this data are able to do so through the internet. Now, let's take a look at another example. The company provides a trading application for its customers, and customers are able to log into the application to see their portfolio. But a vulnerability exists in the application such that a customer is able to tweak the parameters in his HTTPS request to the application and access other customers' information. The customer is also able to buy and sell share in the other customer's account. Now, in this situation, there is a loss of confidentiality as well as a loss of integrity. The customer was able to access data that he was not supposed to access, and he was also able to modify the data in an unauthorized manner. Now, let's take a third example. In this example, a trading application that the company provides to its customers failed because the underlying database faced some storage issues and went down. Customers are no longer able to access the trading application. Now, this is a scenario where there is a loss of availability because both the application and the underlying data remains unavailable to customers. Business Impact Assessment or BIA. Business Impact Assessment is a technique used to find out the most critical applications and systems to the organization. So every application and system within the organization has to undergo this test. Now, assessment is mainly done from the perspective of the CIA triad. And the three main questions asked are: what is the likely damage to the company if the data hosted within the system gets leaked out to the public? What is the likely damage if the system were to malfunction or get hacked? And what is the likely damage if the system were to become unavailable? Business impact is measured along three lines: financial impact, reputational damage to the organization's brand, and regulatory impact within the legal jurisdictions in which the organization operates. Let us take a few scenarios and examine the business impact in each scenario. Scenario number 1. There is a customer portfolio portal which holds details of every share that the customer has bought through the company. And there is another portal within the company which is an internal best practice documentations portal. Now imagine that external hackers were able to gain access to both the customer portfolio portal and the company internal best practice documentations portal. So the confidentiality of company data is under attack here. Now, which unauthorized access do you think would cost the company the most? It would be the access to the customer portfolio portal. This is because the portal holds customer sensitive information, most likely personally identifiable information of the customer. The company will face huge reputational damage, and if it is proven that the company did not take adequate measures to protect customer data, then they can face huge regulatory fines because they will be in violation of privacy laws. So the customer portfolio portal as an application is more critical than the company internal best practice documentations portal. Now let's take scenario number 2. Now we have another two systems within the company. The first one is a voting application for internal surveys where employees can log in and register their vote. Whereas the second application is a video conferencing application which employees use to talk to each other between different offices as well as with external partners. Now imagine that the integrity of these two applications are affected. In the case of the internal survey voting system, a user is able to vote on behalf of another user. Whereas in the case of the video conferencing application, uninvited guests are able to join ongoing video conferencing sessions. Now, which application do you think will cost the company more? Most likely it is a video conferencing application, because if external parties are able to break into confidential conversations that's happening within the company, then company's plans, decisions, and intellectual property might leak out to the public. As such, the video conferencing application could be considered as a more critical application than the internal survey voting system. Now let's take the next example. Now in this example, we are comparing between the customer service portal and the employee leave tracker application. Imagine that the availability of both these applications are affected and both these applications are down. Which application do you think would impact the company the most? In all likelihood, it is going to be the customer service portal, because if the portal is down, then customers cannot raise their service requests and they are going to be very unhappy. Customers may choose to vent out in public social media platforms. It might make the news and the company's reputation can take a great hit. So comparing between these two platforms, it could be deemed that the customer service portal is more critical than the employee leave tracker application. So it is possible to classify every application in the organization into different buckets of criticality: very high, medium, and low. And this is based on how a loss of confidentiality, integrity, or availability of that particular application affects the organization. And the organization can further ensure that very high criticality applications have additional controls in place. The first requirement could be that these applications have an active production and disaster recovery setup, such that if production goes down, then disaster recovery can take over almost immediately. And another requirement could be that multi-factor authentication is required to gain access to this application. So employees would have to use password and biometric or password and token to gain access to these applications. A third requirement could be that these applications have to undergo a thorough and more frequent penetration testing, such that if there are vulnerabilities in the application which may be introduced recently due to a change, they are identified and remediated as soon as possible. Risk assessment methodology. Now there are two factors needed to calculate the risk rating for any particular risky scenario. The first factor is the business impact, which we already saw. It is the most likely business impact in terms of financial, reputational, and regulatory damage to the organization due to a particular risky situation materializing. The second factor is likelihood of occurrence. How likely is a particular risky situation actually coming true? Now, once we have these two factors figured out, the risk is calculated as the product of business impact and likelihood of occurrence. Now, organizations usually use a risk matrix where we have business impact along one axis and likelihood along the other axis to arrive at the risk rating. Now, it is always a good idea to express the risk in plain English in terms of the actual business impact statement and the likelihood of occurrence statement, rather than just providing a risk rating. Otherwise, there is a chance that the underlying complexities of the risk are lost in translation when it is communicated to senior management. Now, let's see what I meant with the help of two risk scenarios. The first scenario is where an organization has customer confidential data which is stored in a customer table in a database. Now, the customer confidential data is not encrypted before it is pushed to the database. The second risk scenario is an organization with many employees and endpoint devices or laptops, but the hard disks of those laptops are not encrypted. Now, the business impact due to the first risk scenario is that because the confidential data is not encrypted, it gets to the wrong hands and leaks out of the organization, and the organization faces regulatory and reputational damage. Whereas the business impact in the second risk scenario is that employees misplace the laptops or the laptops get stolen, and because the laptops contain confidential data, the confidential data leaks out to the public and the company faces regulatory and reputational damage. Now we can see that both the business impacts are similar in nature. The likelihood of the first risk scenario is low to medium. This is because employees who have access to the data are only those people with read-only or above privileges to the database. Whereas the likelihood for the second scenario is high because the employees of the organization are highly mobile and they always carry the laptop for work, and there is a high chance that the laptop can get misplaced or stolen. Now, if we analyze these risks in terms of the risk metrics, for the first scenario, we know that the business impact is high, so we are along this column, and the likelihood is low to medium. So let's say that we are here, and then the risk rating is highest risk. Now for the second scenario, again, we know that the business impact is high, so we are along this line, and the likelihood is also high, so we are at here, and we again arrive at a risk rating of highest risk. Now we can see that both scenarios have a risk rating of highest risk, even though the underlying complexities of the risk are different. From analysis, we know that risk situation number 2 is a much more critical risk because the likelihood of this occurring is much higher than that of risk scenario number 1. So this is why it is very important that when we are communicating risk situations to top level management, rather than just giving them the risk rating, communicate to them in plain English the business impact statement and the likelihood statement so that they get the complete picture and they can make better decisions at handling the risk. Risk register. Every organization should have a risk register software. As and when new risks get discovered within the organization, it should be entered into the risk register, and risk action items that have been agreed with management to bring the risk within tolerable levels should be entered as well. Ownership and target closure dates should be assigned against every risk item and risk action item in the risk register. The number of outstanding risk and risk action items for any department should be tied to its key risk indicator. Similarly, the rate of closure of risk and risk action items should be tied to the department's key performance indicator. This is the approach that organizations should take in order to ensure that there is proper reward and punishment, carrot and stick, to drive a prudent risk management culture within the organization. Defense in depth. Defense in depth is the concept of layering one control on top of each other, with each control capable of protecting the company's critical data and assets from an attack. The idea here is that even if one layer is breached, the other layers still stand protecting the company. Now let's explain this concept further by taking the example of a phishing email sent by an external attacker to an employee within the company. All emails coming in will be scanned by the secure email gateway, and if the gateway finds any sign of phishing, then that email will be blocked at the perimeter itself. Now, suppose the secure email gateway failed to block the phishing email and it landed in the employee's mailbox. The employee is not supposed to click on suspicious emails because he has been given adequate amount of security awareness training by the security team within the organization. The employee would report the suspicious phishing email to the security team within the organization. Now suppose the employee opens the phishing email and clicks on the malicious link within the email. The secure web gateway within the organization is supposed to scan every file that is being downloaded, and if it finds that the file is malware ridden, then the file will be blocked at the perimeter. Now let's say that the secure web gateway failed to do its job and the malware landed in the employee's computer. The antivirus solution that is present in the employee's computer is supposed to quarantine the file when it tries to run. Now let's say the antivirus also failed because the malware was a zero-day malware, and the malware run successfully established a backend connection to the attacker, and the attacker now has access to the employee system. Now if the attacker begins scanning the network to find what are the other devices and services in the network, then honeypots come to know about this, and honeypots alert that there is something wrong with the employee's machine. Now let's say that the honeypots also failed and the attacker succeeded in gathering company confidential data and is trying to extract out that information. Now that is where data loss prevention solutions come into the picture and they play their part. Now, similar to this particular scenario that we have seen, the concept of defense in depth should be applied to every applicable attack scenario within the organization. Hardware inventory. Every organization should maintain an up-to-date list of old hardware owned or leased by the organization. The hardware inventory should have details such as hardware ownership, the purpose of the hardware, and basic configurations of the hardware. Now, other security processes within the organization such as vulnerability management and patching should be able to use the hardware inventory as a golden source. Now, without a hardware inventory, theft of hardware will be very difficult to detect, and any data loss that has taken place in the organization through hardware theft will go unnoticed. Software inventory. Similar to the hardware inventory, an inventory of all software purchased and subscribed by the company should be maintained. The inventory should have information such as license information and to whom it is assigned to, and the purpose of the software. Additionally, an organization should maintain a list of approved software which users can install in their machines. Controls should be implemented to ensure that users can only install software from the approved list. This is to protect the organization against license infringements due to employees using personal use software on work laptops, and also to prevent the installation of shady applications like Trojan horses, which can spy on the organization or leak sensitive information. Authentication. Let's look at the concept of authentication. Authentication is verifying that someone is whom they claim to be. Now, this can be done through three factors of authentication. The first one is something they know, like a password. The second one is something they have, like a token or a mobile device to which a one-time password could be sent. The third factor is something they are, like a fingerprint scan, a palm scan, or an iris scan. As we know, the most common factor of authentication used are passwords. And passwords are stronger when it is a combination of uppercase letters, lowercase, numbers, and symbols. Making sentences for passwords with a combination of these four factors is a smart choice as well. Organizations should always implement multiple factors of authentication for critical accesses. Authorization. Authorization is the process of checking whether a particular person is allowed to access a platform that he is trying to access. Now, there is a difference between authentication and authorization. Authentication is verifying the identity of a person, whereas authorization is checking whether that particular identity have access to a platform and what level of access. Let us look at authentication and authorization a bit more in detail. Authentication in organizations are implemented by the Microsoft Active Directory solution or a single sign-on solution that the organization might be using. So either the Active Directory or the SSO solution verifies whether a person is whom he claims to be, whereas authorization may be implemented by individual applications using a privilege table in the application's own database. Now, this is not suggesting that individual applications cannot handle authentication at all. There are cases where individual applications handle authentication in addition to authorization, and the individual application might have another database table where the user's hashed password is kept. But the most common flow will be to use either Active Directory or single sign-on for authentication. Let's take a look at this flow to understand this concept better. The first step is that the user reaches out to the application requesting for authentication and authorization to be performed. The application then redirects the authentication request to the Active Directory or the single sign-on server. Once the authentication verification is done, the Active Directory or single sign-on will communicate back to the application telling that authentication have been completed successfully. As the next step, the application will check whether the user exists in its privilege table and whether the user has the right privileges being requested. So this is the authorization verification check. Once authorization completes successfully, the application sends the authorization token to the user. Further, the user can use the authorization token to request the required resources from the application. Identity and access management solution. Every organization should make sure that all access provisioning and change that takes place within them are accounted for and is fully auditable. Organizations should use full-fledged identity and access management solutions to manage the entire life cycle of accesses, starting from the point of access request to access approval workflow, access provisioning, and any changes made to that access in the course of time, ultimately to the point of removal of the access. Periodic access reviews should be conducted on every application within the organization, commensurate with the criticality of the application. As an example, critical applications should be reviewed every 6 months, important applications should be reviewed every 1 year, and non-important applications can be reviewed every 2 years. A process should be put in place to manage the accesses of movers and leavers within the organization. When someone moves from one department to another within the organization, they should be treated as a leaver plus a joiner. Their accesses specific to the first department should be removed, and they should be provided fresh access to the second department based on their job role. Privileged access management, or PAM. Now, there are certain accesses within organizations which are deemed more sensitive than normal accesses. Such accesses are called privileged access. Examples would be Active Directory Domain Controller Administrator or a database administrator. PAM solutions help to implement certain controls for privileged accesses. The first one is just-in-time elevation or just-in-time provisioning. When someone makes a request for a privileged access, they need to submit a request within the PAM solution with a strong business justification, and approval need to be gotten through the PAM workflow for request approvals. Once the approval is gotten, the access is only provided for a short time window, and after the time window has passed, the access will be removed. Second control applied by PAM solutions is multi-factor authentication. Anybody requesting for a privileged access need to authenticate using their passwords plus an additional factor of authentication such as token or OTP sent to their mobile devices. The third control applied by PAM solutions is activity recording. The entire set of activities carried out by the user during the elevated state of the privileged access will be recorded for audit purposes. Certain PAM solutions also make a video record of the activity that was carried out. Privileged access management policies within most organizations require that activity reviews be carried out by manager of the user who performed the privileged activity. Secure coding practices. This is the realm of cybersecurity which makes sure that programs developed within organizations are free from vulnerabilities as much as possible. Research indicates that most of the vulnerabilities in software is caused by a few categories of vulnerabilities, and the most prominent among them being buffer overflows. So it is possible to significantly improve the security state of software development within organizations by following secure coding practices. The first secure coding practice is manual code review of critical modules. Critical modules such as authentication, authorization, and financial transaction modules should be manually code reviewed by senior developers within a department. The second secure coding practice is to use static code analysis tools which can analyze the source code files of programs and highlight areas of vulnerabilities that needs remediation. The third secure coding practice is to use dependency vulnerability analysis tools which are capable of looking at all the libraries used by the program and check whether there are any weaknesses or vulnerabilities in the upstream dependencies and libraries. The fourth secure coding practice is to use dynamic code analysis tools which are capable of analyzing the code when it actually runs and test it with edge cases to uncover vulnerabilities. Let us look a bit more on the difference between static code analysis and dynamic code analysis. Static code analysis is analysis of the source code using automated tools to look for signs of weaknesses. Static code analysis is similar to how a car mechanic might inspect a car when it is not really running, looking at the engine oil level, the coolant level, the transmission fluid level, the battery condition, the seat belt condition, and the belt tension, etc. Whereas dynamic code analysis is actually testing the program when it is running. Taking the car example, the mechanic would test drive the car, and while it is being driven, he would test its steering, brake, the gear, the driving comfort, and the car's mileage. Both static and dynamic code analysis are required for uncovering vulnerabilities, and they play their own part. Logging. Logging is the process of recording the tracks of any significant event that takes place within the organization. Organizations should log all authentication, authorization, transaction, and privilege escalation attempts, regardless of whether the attempt is a success or a failure. Log records are going to be very important supporting data when security incident investigations are carried out in any organization. Security logs should be forwarded to a central logging server or a central logging infrastructure such as Splunk. Access to the central logging server should be restricted and monitored such that unauthorized modification of the logs are not allowed. Backups. All applications within the organization which has a high availability requirement should consider the implementation of active configurations in their production and disaster recovery environments. See the example on the screen. Any request that comes into the load balancer can be serviced by node number 1 or node number 2, and if one of the nodes goes out of business, the other node is there to service. Now, regardless of the above active setup, the organization should back up all the data it needs for its operations on a periodic basis to offline storage. Now, this is because there are situations in which the primary and the secondary data center of an organization can get affected by the same issue, such as a ransomware attack. When such scenarios materializes, the company should be able to fall back on its backed up offline storage and restore its operations. The company should periodically perform backup restore tests to ensure that the backed up data is actually retrievable and restorable in a timely manner. Security awareness. People are often the weakest cybersecurity link within organizations. People are often helpful, and sometimes they are too helpful. They might let in strangers into their office premises thinking that they are helping someone who lost their badge or forgot to bring their badge that day. People are also unassuming of communications from strangers, and often they have no qualms in clicking on the strangest of links present in the emails they receive. Now, if we compare the budget that most organizations allocate for technical controls versus the budget that they allocate for security awareness training, the security awareness training piece is almost always the minuscule piece. This organizational mindset should change, and a more significant budget should be allocated for security awareness training and in securing the human element. Segregation of environments. Now, there are different environments for applications. The first one is development or dev, and this is the environment where the actual writing of the source code takes place and the immediate testing of the source code. The second is the system integration testing or SIT environment. This is the environment where a few modules of the application, after they have been written, would be brought together, integrated together, and thorough testing will be carried out by the quality assurance team. The third environment is user acceptance testing or UAT environment. This is the environment where the actual business users come together and they test out the application and make sure that the original requirements that they have communicated have been properly implemented. The fourth environment is the staging or STG environment, and this is an environment which is set up very closely to that of production. The configuration in STG environment should almost 100% match that of production. The idea here is that the application can be properly released to production, and if there are any issues in the application, it should break in staging rather than in production. The fifth environment is production. This is the actual environment where the application runs to serve its end users. The last environment is disaster recovery or DR. This is an environment that should complement the production environment, and if the production environment goes down for any reason, the application is supposed to serve its customers from the DR environment. Now, we have seen that an application can have so many environments, each environment serving its own purpose. So these environments should be set up in such a way that they are segregated and issues in one environment should not affect the other environments. This concept is known as segregation of environments. Segregation of duties, also known as separation of duties or SOD. Now, this is a basic concept in risk management which is used to prevent fraud and errors. Imagine that in order to operate a nuclear weapon, 2 keys and 1 passcode is needed. And imagine that instead of distributing it to 3 people, they were all given to just 1 person. What is wrong with this situation? The world would be at the mercy of this person's whims and fancies. And if this person goes mad, then total destruction. So rather than just relying on one person, organizations should always involve multiple individuals and multiple teams in carrying out critical functions and services. This is the concept of segregation of duties. So functions such as IT development, quality assurance testing, user acceptance testing, and production releases should be separated out and should be carried out by different individuals and teams so that everybody plays their part responsibly and proper checks and balances are upheld. Penetration testing. Penetration testing is approved ethical hacking carried out by organizations on their own systems and applications in order to test out its security. Penetration testing is different from mere vulnerability scanning. Vulnerability scanning is aimed at reaching out to every IP address in the network space of the organization, fingerprinting the operating system, finding out what ports are open and what services are running behind those ports, and fingerprinting those services. Once the fingerprinting is completed and the version of the operating system and the services are known, the vulnerability scanner checks what vulnerabilities are affecting those particular versions of operating system and services. Vulnerability scanning for the most part is an automated process, whereas penetration testing requires the help of expert penetration testers, and as a whole, penetration testing cannot be automated. Penetration test is more like a skill or an art. There are different steps to penetration testing, and the first step is called reconnaissance. This is a step where the penetration tester gathers as much information as possible about the target systems without directly interacting with the target systems. The penetration tester uses open sources such as Google for the job. The second step is called scanning, and this is the step where the penetration tester directly interacts with all IP addresses associated with the target system and tries to enumerate the services running within those IP addresses. This step is more synonymous with vulnerability scanning. In the next step, the penetration tester looks at the vulnerabilities that have been discovered in the scanning phase and uses them to construct custom exploits for the target system so that he can gain access to the target system. After successfully gaining access, the penetration tester has to make sure that the access is hidden from the eyes of security solutions such as anti-malware and intrusion detection systems so that the access could be maintained long enough. The penetration tester might further try to extract a sample of sensitive data present in the target system in order to prove the point that a real attacker will be able to do so. The next step involves producing a detailed report about the target system, enumerating the vulnerabilities that were discovered, how they were exploited, and what are the potential remediations for those vulnerabilities. Regulations in many jurisdictions mandate that externally facing systems be penetration tested before they are commissioned for service. And companies usually employ qualified penetration testing service providers for the job. Having an in-house penetration testing team is a good idea, and they could do the first rounds of penetration test before the external service provider hits. Having an in-house penetration testing team is a cost-effective strategy to make sure that the security of systems are upkept following minor changes to the system. There are different approaches that could be taken for penetration testing. The first approach is called black box testing, where no information is provided about the system to the penetration tester, and the penetration tester has to attack like an outsider. The second approach is called gray box testing, where some information about the system and possibly a user account of the system is provided to the penetration tester, and the penetration tester attacks from the perspective of an insider. The third approach is called white box testing, and in this approach the pen tester is provided full access to the source code of the system, and the pen tester performs a thorough testing. Now this approach is used to iron out all vulnerabilities present in the system. ITSM onboarding. ITSM is IT service management, and ITSM onboarding refers to onboarding an application to the company's approved tools for managing all the organizational IT services pertaining to the application. Now, there are four main IT services within organizations: general services, changes, incidents, and problems. An example of a general service request is when an employee requests for an account to a database. An example of a change request is, let's say, a new functionality being added to the customer portal. An example of an incident would be if the database supporting an application is down. An example of a problem would be if the incidents keep repeating, and let's say the database went down many times over the week and there is a real issue that needs to be solved. Now, instead of requesting for all these services through the email or chat, it would be much more efficient to request for them through a proper ticketing system with full-fledged workflows to track them from request to approval to completion and closure. A proper ticketing system would make sure that the metrics and the numbers surrounding each of these services will be available for further analysis, thereby helping to improve these services. IT controls testing. IT controls testing is a self-assessment that is carried out by application and system owners within an organization. They basically have to check whether the application and systems under their portfolio complies with the company's IT policies and standards. IT controls testing provides an avenue to application and system owners to basically clean up their portfolio before they are hit by the second line or the third line within the organization. IT controls testing is subcategorized into two kinds of testing. The first one is the design adequacy test. In this test, the design of the IT control will be assessed to see whether it is adequate enough to meet the policy and the standard requirement that it is trying to meet. We will see an example in a few seconds. If the control design is assessed to be adequate, then the next test would be the operational effectiveness test. This test includes examining a few samples and seeing whether the IT control was successfully applied to those samples. Let us explain this further with the help of this example here. Now imagine that the company had a policy which states that employees should use strong passwords, and a company subsidiary has designed a control to meet the policy. The control says employees should use passwords which are 20 characters in length and they should change the password every week. If we analyze the design of this control a bit in depth, we can see that forcing people to change their passwords every week is a bit too much, and employees might resort to writing down the passwords in sticky notes near their desks. And this is an insecure practice. So this control has the potential to push people in the wrong direction, and it promotes insecure password culture. As such, this control would fail the design adequacy test. And now let's take a new example. The company policy is the same, which is that employees should use strong passwords. And the control that has been defined by a company subsidiary to meet this policy is that employees should use passwords which are at least 8 characters in length, and the password should be changed every 3 months, and the password should be a combination of uppercase, lowercase, symbol, and number letters. Now, the design of this control is actually assessed to be adequate, so it passed the DA test. For the operational effectiveness test, 10 applications were taken as samples, and out of the 10 applications, it was found that 2 applications did not have the minimum character length for passwords enforced. Furthermore, another application did not have the full categories of character combinations for passwords enforced. So in this example, the design adequacy test succeeded, whereas the operational effectiveness test failed. Disaster recovery environment, or DR. Now, depending upon the availability requirements of the applications and systems within an organization, the disaster recovery environment should be prepared. Now, traditionally, there have been 3 types of DR environments: hot, warm, and cold. Now, the hot DR environment has fully redundant infrastructure, and it can perform an immediate failover to DR when the production is no longer available. There are 2 configurations in which the production and DR environments are set up in a hot site. The first one is called active-active. In the active-active configuration, both the production and the DR are active at the same time, and requests come to them often in a round-robin fashion. When one instance goes down, the other instance continues to operate. In the active-passive setup, the DR environment is up and running, but it does not receive any requests. It will only start receiving requests when the production goes down. In the warm DR setup, the company has office space and computer equipment, but the computer equipment are not up and running. They need to be turned on, data needs to be loaded into the servers, and the applications needs to be booted up. In the cold DR setup, the company only has office space and data backed up. So the computer equipments need to be purchased or loaned, they need to be set up in the office space, data needs to be loaded into them, and the applications needs to be booted up. Comparing between the 3 disaster recovery environment types, the cold site is the least costly, but it takes the most time to recover from a disaster. Service provider or third-party risk assessment. Service providers are those who provide a service to the company and the company has established a service level agreement with them. Service providers are also known as third parties. The company forms the first party, the company's customer forms the second party, and anybody providing service to the company forms the third party. In the process of the company providing a service to its customer, it is dependent on a third party who is a service provider. A business impact assessment should be performed on the service provided by the third party, and how important is that service to the company should be ascertained. The SLA between the company and its service providers should be reviewed, and it should be ensured that the service levels are adequate for the company to meet its own commitment to its customers. Now, if the company fails to perform this review properly and the service levels agreed with the third party turns out to be inadequate, then the company risks failing its own obligations to its customers. The SLA should be legally binding and it should be included in the legal contract with the third parties. Also, any IT controls that the company requires the third party to apply on data that the company has provided to the third party should be enumerated in the legal contract so that it is legally binding. The company should perform an IT risk assessment on the IT controls maturity of the service provider. This could be done by reviewing the IT policies and standards of the service provider, the IT certifications they hold, and requesting for any documentations on the specific controls that the service provider has agreed to implement, and asking for artifacts demonstrating and evidencing the IT controls. However, organizations should always remember that service provider engagements are inherently risky due to the service provider being an outside party. An inventory should be maintained by every organization detailing the service providers that they have engaged. The inventory should hold details such as who owns the vendor relationship within the organization, details of the services provided by the vendor, inherent risks identified in the vendor engagement, and links to repositories containing legal contracts, service level agreements, and other documents of interest. Annual reviews should be carried out to assess the performance of the vendor against the service level agreements, and any shortcomings should be taken up for remediation. Congratulations on completing the course. I hope I was able to give you a very good overview of cybersecurity and IT risk management in the enterprise. Hopefully the concepts you picked up here serves you well in your enterprises. Please rate the course and provide your valuable feedback so that you can help other students as well. I wish you the very best. Thank you so much.